Good evening. Thanks for joining us on India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan. Let's go straight to the market action. And what a dramatic week it has been. A roller coaster ride for equities, currencies and commodities, not just in India, but around the world. Let's start with taking a look at the Sensex and how this week has panned out. It tells you the story of the kind of volatility that we've seen. Nearly 100 points gained on Monday, nearly 200 points lost on Tuesday, a bumper rally on Wednesday, and then that 750-point drop on Thursday. And to cap it off, a 730-point rally on Friday, which has helped the Sensex turn positive for 2018. Well, all in all, the week ended with gains of 2%. It was not just the equities. Let's take a look at the currency market. The rupee started the week at 74 to the dollar. Over the next 2 days, it depreciated and further threatened to breach the 75 mark. But today, it broke below those levels, making significant gains against the dollar. The 56 paise gain today was the biggest one-day rally that we've seen for the rupee over the last 3 weeks. And crude oil prices seeing similar volatility, wild swings. The week began at $83 per barrel for Brent. It then moved closer to 85 on Tuesday, but then a steady decline since then, and we're now back to the $80 mark per barrel. That's the story as far as crude is concerned. And staying with macros, a double cheer for the economy. Retail inflation in September largely steady. Industrial output in August has slowed down, but it's still higher than expectations. Let's talk about retail inflation first. It's coming in at 3.77% for the month of September, marginally higher than it was for August, but it is still below expectations. On the other hand, industrial production grew by 4.3% in August. This is slower than June and July, but that was due to the base impact, and the number still ahead of estimates. Lata joins us now with the highlights. Lata, so good news there on the macros. Inflation continues to be benign and IIP not looking bad either.
Yes, the economy numbers that came today were a double joy because growth was higher than expected and inflation was lower than expected. So inflation coming in at 3.77 against expectations of 4.16 by the economists. So the September inflation is very similar to the August inflation. 3.7 is way below even the Reserve Bank's given mandated legislated target of 4%. What's working for the lower inflation numbers is basically food. Food inflation has come in at 0.5%, just marginally higher than the 0.29% for the month of August. And that's largely because you're seeing vegetable, sugar and pulses prices actually fall, contract compared to year-ago levels. What was still higher was fuel and light fuel prices obviously going up. That's come in at about 8.5%, and housing at about 7%. This is largely the last vestiges of the pay commission, and it will start falling. So the core inflation, what you call non-food, non-fuel, the services inflation, that's at about 5.8%, still a little lower than the 5.9% in the month of August. That's as far as inflation is concerned. The only worry is the fall in rural inflation. But I'll come to that in just a minute. First, the growth numbers, industrial growth numbers at 4.16, not joyous in itself, but the expectation was 3 to 3.5. So compared to that, it's good. Electricity was the best number at 7.6, but what didn't fire was manufacturing, coming in at barely 4%, 4.6. And there both capital goods and consumer goods failed to fire, just coming in at about a very average 5% each. Now, the key takeaway from this is inflation is simply not picking up, and the food disinflation is so severe that even if you add crude and a cheaper rupee, or rather an expensive dollar, you will probably not even get to the 4.8% forecast by the RBI by March 31st. You will probably come somewhere at 4.4. So the key takeaway from economists is that they are not penciling any rate hike till the end of the current fiscal year. If anything, the fall in rural inflation to 3.3% is a worry. The contraction in prices of the fall in prices of pulses, sugar and vegetables can actually erode aggregate demand and purchasing power in the rural areas, which may actually endanger growth. So although nobody is cutting their growth forecast just yet, the inflation number is so benign that it might actually be an indicator that growth may not fire.
All right, Lata, appreciate you joining us. So that is something to consider, the data that we're seeing when it comes to inflation and what it could mean as far as the rural economy is concerned. But the big newsmaker tonight, an NRI bond remains an option, but the time may not be right just yet. That's the operative word. And that's the word in from Economic Affairs Secretary Subhash Chandra Garg. Speaking to me from the sidelines of the IMF World Bank meeting in Bali, Garg said that the exchange rate will be a crucial factor in determining the timing for an NRI bond, also, of course, capital flows and the reserve situation. He also spoke about oil imports from Iran. With the US sanctions looming large, he said that imports will continue, at least for the month of November. They've been tied up. Post that, it continues to be a question mark. But even so, there could be a further decline in the imports. Imports from Iran have been on a declining trend. And Mr. Garg suggesting that in the month of November, we could see even a further decline. Mr. Garg, so you know there is optimism there as far as the crude forecast is concerned and how it could impact India. But I also want to understand, sir, because there is a meeting today that the Prime Minister is holding on this particular issue on domestic crude building on domestic crude production. The Iranian sanctions, sir, where do things stand on negotiations with the US? President Trump on both those issues saying that India will know sooner rather than later about our position on both our defense deals with Russia as well as the issue with Iran on crude. Where does the payment mechanism issue as well as our negotiation with Iran stand?
See, the petroleum minister had clarified that we will continue to have the Iranian oil to some extent. And the contracts have been done for November. And so I would go by what the minister said, and we will work out whatever is the appropriate arrangement to put that into effect.
So you're saying that it will only be to some extent, so it will not be what we have usually been importing from Iran?
No, that has, even in the past 6 months, there has been some change in what we've been buying from Iran. It may not be the same, but that does not really matter. So those things are taken into account in the aggregate purchase of oil, which the petroleum ministry is taking. The more important thing is that we have tied for our needs for November, and next month we will take care of what we need in December.
Okay, so tied up for November, we don't have full clarity on what will happen post that. But Mr. Garg, I want to talk to you about the possibility of this NRI bonds, and the speculation in the market is that because the RBI governor isn't with you in Bali, that the government is seriously considering the possibility of moving ahead with this. Yesterday, what we heard from government officials was that it's an option on the table. It could be exercised in a day, in a month, or not at all. What could be the precipitating factor to exercise that option, sir?
See, this option has always been on the table. I've also clarified from time to time. It doesn't take long to put it into effect. So as and when it is needed to be put onto the table or to show it can be done. But when exactly it is going to be done is not something we can discuss now. It depends upon the kind of situation, kind of reserves, kind of movements on rupee, etc. Therefore, this is not exactly the time when one can say that this would be done at any particular specific point of time.
Well, the time may not be just yet for an NRI bond, but it is certainly an option on the table. The government is ready. It will exercise that option when it feels it's appropriate. From one big government voice to another, the rupee is very competitive at the current levels, and don't be surprised if it appreciates in the near term. That's the word in from the principal economic advisor, Sanjeev Sanyal. Speaking to CNBC TV18, Sapnada Sanyal also added that the Indian rupee has been relatively stronger against its competitors. Take a look.
As far as the exchange rate is concerned, yes, it dipped a long way from where it was at the beginning of the year.
It was a heavy depreciation.
Yes, it is definitely a heavy depreciation. It's still, today it may have bounced up, but it's still a long way down from where it was in the beginning of the year.
Right.
But as I keep saying, you have to keep it in context. We have depreciated against the US dollar, but against most of our competitors and trading partners, we have been reasonably stable for many years. And in any case, I would argue that at the current level, the rupee is very, very competitive. And so if I take a medium-term perspective of it, I would be not very surprised if it appreciated from here.
Well, that's Sanjeev Sanyal saying that the rupee may be at a competitive level now and could appreciate further. A look at the US markets, where Wall Street has also recovered after a sharp sell-off that we've seen over the last 2 days. The Dow up by more than 250 points, regaining some of this week's steep losses. And the S&P and the Nasdaq also trading with strong gains. So it's green on the screen even on Wall Street. But President Trump's comments on the Fed didn't trigger a crash on Wall Street. That's the word in from US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, speaking exclusively to CNBC's Jeff Cutmer on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank. Mnuchin called the recent fall on Wall Street a natural correction. Defending Trump's comments, he added that the US president was only concerned about the Fed raising interest rates too much and slowing down the economy.
I think the fundamentals are still very strong. The U.S. economy is strong. U.S. earnings are strong. So I see this as just a natural correction after the markets were up a lot.
So it's about valuation rather than concerns around interest rates or the actions of the Fed going forward?
There's really no new information in the market on the Fed or on trade for that matter. So I really see this as a reaction of markets tend to go too far in both directions, and they have natural corrections. So you see the markets traded up a little bit overnight, and I think that's a good thing.
There were some curious moments, though, in the trading session where we saw both equities and bonds being sold down at the same time, which raised some concerns that maybe there was a broad retreat from risk and concerns about the level of U.S. debt. But no, you don't see it like that.
I definitely don't see it that way. And matter of fact, in the bond markets 4 weeks ago, people were asking me if I was concerned that the yield curve was too flat and whether that indicated recession for next year. And I said absolutely not. 4 weeks ago, I said markets aren't always efficient. So you've seen a normalization in the yield curve, which makes sense. So the fact that that's occurred at the same time as a correction in the stock market.
You don't think in any way that the market on the second day of the sell-off became concerned that President Trump appeared to be attacking the Fed with his comments about the crazy actions that Jay Powell and his team were taking?
Well, the president's been clear. He likes low interest rates. So I think that's really what it was about.
So in no sense at all do you think people are uncertain about the president's attitude towards the Fed, and it hasn't in any way damaged brand Fed?
Not at all. And the president has said, you know, he respects the independence of the Fed, and they're doing their job.
Here we saw very strong defense of Jay Powell. Christine Lagarde, the IMF chief, said she felt he was a serious man with a serious team. Governor Carney also weighed in from the Bank of England and said he's a man who understands the pipework in the financial system. Why, if they can give a spirited defense, does the president feel he needs to attack the Federal Reserve?
Well, he doesn't feel he needs to attack at all. Again, the president likes low interest rates. The president is concerned about the Fed raising interest rates too much and slowing down the economy, and those are obviously natural concerns.
What's your view on Jay Powell?
First of all, I think Jay's doing a good job. He understands the regulatory environment, spending a lot of time here on regulations. We took bank regulations too far in the other direction. I think that whether it's the OCC or the Fed or the FDIC, we're now allowing our U.S. banks to be able to lend. That's an important part of the market and economic recovery.
Well, that's the U.S. Treasury Secretary defending President Donald Trump, saying he didn't cause the stock market crash because of his comments calling the U.S. Fed crazy. Now, the Niti Aayog has raised concerns over the surge in the import of minerals at a review meeting with the Prime Minister's office. Anshu Sharma, who's been tracking that story, joins us now. Anshu, what are the concerns that the Niti Aayog has raised, and what have they suggested in ways in which imports could be curbed or tariffs imposed on exports?
So Niti Aayog in its meeting with the Prime Minister office has highlighted how hugely the judicial orders have impacted the mineral sector, and there's trade deficit of about 4.6 million ton in FY18. Now the recommendation that Niti Aayog has given in its representation to the line ministries as well as the Prime Minister's office is that there should be reduction of export duty on iron ore to 15% from current 30%, and for import of any iron ore, there should be increase of import duty to 15% from current 2.5%. Now, this is against what Steel Ministry and Mines Ministry have recommended. They had recommended in the past that finished goods in steel should garner more dollars for the government and not export of raw material like iron ore. Other recommendations are for primary aluminium, where Niti Aayog has suggested that it should be increased to 10% from 7.5%, aluminium scrap to 7.5% from current 2.5%, and most importantly copper concentrate, which is 96% imported. Now Niti Aayog has recommended that it should be brought down to 0% from 2.5% currently. It has also suggested otherwise that low grade iron ore should be utilized in India, and Mines Ministry should ensure and take action with regards to export bans, specifically in Karnataka. But please remember, all of these suggestions will have to be agreed upon, and Commerce Ministry will have to give its recommendation to Finance Ministry before any export or import duty notification comes in. Back to you.
Anshu, thanks very much. As Anshu was pointing out, a final call on this will be taken by the Commerce Ministry in conjunction with the Finance Ministry. Here's the latest in the race for Essar Steel. Russian financial services giant VTB, which is currently part of the New Metal Consortium, has now moved the Supreme Court seeking clarity. This as VTB plans a solo bid for Essar Steel. Ritu joins us now with the details. Ritu, this was being speculated, but it's finally clear that VTB has decided that if it can, it will go solo for Essar Steel.
The deadline for both New Metal and ArcelorMittal to clear dues to remain eligible to bid for Essar Steel ends on the 18th of October, and with just days to go for that, now we understand from sources that VTB, which is the largest partner in the New Metal Consortium, is now seeking legal opinion to see if it can bid solo for Essar Steel. This, of course, will help VTB avoid repaying the huge dues that will have to be done, to be eligible for Essar Steel for the New Metal Consortium. Now, remember, that amount is not very clear. Some say it could even be 65,000 crore rupees or upwards of that, because not only does New Metal have to clear dues for Essar Steel, but also any group companies where the Ruyas are promoters. So given that, VTB has moved the Supreme Court seeking judicial advisement on whether or not it can bid solo. Remember, if Supreme Court does allow such a petition, it's also possible that JSW, that is also eyeing a similar proposition, also makes a bid independently. Remember, in the second round, it had bid along with New Metal. So it is an interesting turn of events. It remains to be seen whether Supreme Court even entertains this petition and what then comes to be the outcome of this.
All right, Ritu, appreciate you joining us. So VTB now making it clear that it wants to go alone, but can it is the question. More corporate news. Hindalco has just released the results of its shareholders' vote. It's the last annual general meeting. Now, what's interesting is that Kumar Mangalam Birla's reappointment as director has been approved with over 91% voting in his favour, but 18.6% of public institutional shareholders have voted against the move. Now, this comes just days after 22% of HDFC shareholders voted against Deepak Parikh's reappointment, even as 77% voted in Parikh's favour. Kevin Lee is standing by now with more details. Kevin.
Well, that's right. 18.6% of institutional shareholders of Hindalco, amounting to a little over 14 crore votes, were against Birla's reappointment. Now, institutional investors currently account for 46.8% of Hindalco's total shares. And big institutional investors in the company include LIC, ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund, SBI Mutual Fund and others. Now, we spoke to proxy advisory firm SES, and they confirmed to CNBC TV18 that it had advised institutions to vote against the reappointment. In fact, J.N. Gupta, who's the company's managing director, said, and I quote, "We are of the opinion that the commission paid to Mr. Birla is excessive compared to that of other non-executive directors of the company." So remuneration clearly an issue. We haven't been able to confirm yet if any other proxy advisory firms share this view. We've written to Hindalco on the matter and we're awaiting a response.
All right, Kevin, appreciate you joining us. With that, let's shift our focus to the day's big earnings. FMCG major Hindustan Unilever came out with its second quarter numbers, and they was pretty much in line with street estimates. Volume growth recording a growth of about 10%. This is the fourth straight double-digit quarter volume growth for HUL. Revenue growth and profits also in line with estimates. The company's management expects demand to remain stable in the near term.
Looking ahead, our demand outlook is stable. Crude and currency depreciation are key watch-outs. Our agile and responsive supply chain, data-driven capabilities will enable us best serve consumer needs and position us well to handle the microeconomic challenges.
The Union Minister for Women and Child Development, Maneka Gandhi, has proposed to set up a panel of 4 retired judges to look into cases of sexual harassment and assault that have dominated social media. The Me Too movement is spreading, and in a statement made today, the Minister, Maneka Gandhi, said, and I quote, "I believe in the pain and trauma behind every single complaint. Cases of sexual harassment at work must be dealt with a policy of zero tolerance," end of quote. So how will this panel work? We saw the Justice Verma Committee being created after the Nirbhaya incident, which led to significant changes in the laws related to sexual crimes. But what is going to be the implication of this 4-member committee that the government intends to set up? We don't have any further details, the minister not spelling them out. Joining us now to take that discussion forward, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court, Indira Jaisingh, also Senior Advocate Geeta Luthra, and we'll be joined by Sonal Mattu in just a second. Ms. Jaisingh, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Let me start by asking you, ma'am, we've got the Prevention of Sexual Harassment law that basically looks at sexual harassment of women at the workplace. We also have the IPC. Now, the rape law is very, very different. Each of these laws has a different statute as far as limitation is concerned of time. Now, this 4-member panel that the government intends to set up, and that's all we know from the minister, of 4 retired judges, how can they address this issue?
Yeah. Fortunately, as you yourself mentioned in the introduction, we have a few precedents to go by. As you rightly point out, we had the Verma Committee, which ended in very substantive changes to the law. So let me tell you how it works. The point is that any government has the authority under the Constitution to set up a fact-finding committee to inform itself about a given issue, a given problem, and to make recommendations what is the way forward. So one thing is very clear, that the findings of a committee of this kind are recommendatory in nature. And after the recommendations come in, it is up to the government to decide, think about it, what to do, what not to do. But I would expect that there would be recommendations for law reform, and more importantly, I would expect that the committee would be able to identify where things have gone wrong, despite the existence of a law, what kind of patterns of sexual harassment have emerged from narratives which have come out in the Me Too movement, and try and identify who should be held responsible. This would be my expectation from the committee.
Okay, so you believe that this would work as a fact-finding commission? Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, ma'am.
There's one thing I would like to, there's one thing, of course, I would like to say, and that is the success of this committee will depend upon the people who are appointed to be the fact finders, to be the judges, to be the committee who will look into these issues. And it's they who will have to inspire the confidence of women to come forward and to speak before a committee like this. If the people appointed do not inspire that kind of confidence, it will be a non-starter. So, as you rightly point out, we're waiting to see who will be appointed on this committee.
Or what the terms of reference, in fact, will be for this committee, because at this point in time, all we have is a comment or a statement from the Minister, Maneka Gandhi. So let me go across to Geeta Luthra. Geeta, what would your expectation be? And again, I point out that the details are very sketchy. Another remark made by the Minister was that this committee of 4 retired judges will conduct public hearings. Now, what would you interpret that to mean?
See, I think... I don't think much purpose will be served. I know that the Me Too movement is going great guns, and in a sense it's breaking glass barriers. It's making people who were not speaking up have the courage to speak up just because of the sheer volumes of people. So, you know, there is one stone in the pond, and that ripple has an effect. So there are many, many people who are speaking up, and I'm very pleased about that. But I don't think you can have a public hearing like that. Firstly, issues like this are not something which necessarily a person wants to be subjected to in a public hearing, examination and cross-examination. Now the question is, if the committee that is being intended is just to oversee the law and whether the sexual harassment at workplace law is adequate, then according to me, the law is adequate. Its implementation till now is not. The Supreme Court time and again keeps coming up everywhere and saying, sorry, this committee is not in place. Why is this place not having a committee? I would like to respond. Then a case comes up. A case comes up. And then when the case comes up, then suddenly everybody is rushing around. Sorry, there was no committee. Let's form a committee. Committee is not formed. So all that confusion is still in place, despite the fact that everyone is saying every place has to have a committee.
Government is talking about setting up a committee of 4 retired judges. But can the Supreme Court, for instance, would it be prudent for the Supreme Court to take suo motu cognizance of this?
Can I just respond?
You can't. Can I respond? One, you can't be having retired judges.
Yes.
They can only be a recommendatory committee.
We lost your line.
Yes.
So one second, Ms. Luthra. Let me go across to Ms. Jessing. Ms. Jessing, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes.
I can hear you. Shireen, I have a very serious disagreement with what Ms. Luthra is saying over here. Excuse me, this is not just a question of lack of implementation. You asked the question, are there loopholes in the law? There are. Let me give you one simple example. Today, we are being told that editors of newspapers have committed sexual assaults, etc., with young journalists working under them. Now, my question is, where does the buck stop? Where is the law which says that the board of directors who hired that editor will be held responsible for the actions of that editor? Let me tell you that sexual harassment continues, is pervasive, because the board of directors chooses to turn a blind eye. And this is the gaping hole in the law. It is.
But ma'am, I want to, you know, since we're talking, I understand what you're saying, and absolutely right that that, you know, whether it's the owners, it's the board of directors, if they knew, which looks like this seems to be, at least in some specific instances, an open secret, then the blind eye should not have been turned. But as far as the law is concerned, ma'am, if there was no complaint filed then, and these are, you know, issues that go back 10 years or perhaps even longer, what is the liability then?
Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you. The law very specifically casts a whole chapter on what is known as duties of the employer. Regardless of whether there's a complaint or any complaint, an employer is expected to do ongoing gender audit of what's going on in the organization. They are supposed to train their supervisors, train their editors, pronounce a policy against sexual harassment at the workplace, make it known, make it a part of the contract of employment of every single person who enters that establishment, including the editor. And this is their duty regardless of whether somebody makes a complaint or doesn't make a complaint. They have to make sure that there is no hostile work environment in the workplace. Now, let me give you one simple example. I want to give you a simple example. We are all aware of the case of Terry. We all know that there was a complaint against Pachauri. I will tell you that I had personally written a letter to every member of the board of directors, very, very eminent board. I had also written to the then minister, drawing their attention to the fact that this was going on. And mind you, this was after a complaint was filed. There was a deafening silence. So let's not hide this issue under the carpet. The fact of the matter is that persons in high places, persons in authority, and let me tell you, the complaint doesn't have to come from the affected woman. It can come from a trade union.
Absolutely.
It can come from any other person.
Yes.
Or it can come from the personal knowledge of the employer that there is a hostile work environment in this workplace and they are duty bound to act on it. That's where the buck stops.
Absolutely.
And secondly, Shireen,
and the law very clearly states that. Yes.
Let me tell you something of great importance. Let me tell you that the law as it stands today places no obligation on an employer to pay monetary compensation to a woman whose entire life has been ruined. Compensation, if any, under the law is payable by the harasser. Now, I am of the opinion that one way to stop what is going on is to claim multi-million dollar or rupee damages against the directors who knowingly permit their workplaces to be polluted by sexual harassment at the workplace. And there is an issue here. The reason why women don't bring these type of cases to court is because they have to pay exorbitant court fees on a suit of this kind. I demand that immediately court fees must be waived on any claim relating to violation of the human rights. So there's a lot going on in which all of us have been complicit. It's time to end that impunity. So it's not just a question of non-implementation. What can a committee do? Tell me, what can the committee do? They report to the board of directors. The buck has to stop with the board of directors. And they have to be held directly responsible for what's going on in their workplaces.
No. Well, I have to agree with both of you that the time has come to put a stop to the kind of instances that have come to light, courtesy the Me Too movement. And yes, the provisions of the law are fairly stringent. Implementation is the order of the day. And some of the suggestions, and I think those were some of the recommendations, for instance, on monetary damages that Justice Verma and his commission had also recommended. As I pointed out, we don't have further clarity on what the government intends to do. But speaking of the government, MJ Akbar continues to be a minister, and no statement so far has come in from the government on what it intends to do with Mr. Akbar. But for this evening, Indira Jaisingh and Geeta Luthra, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18.
Space, an Air India plane which hit a wall while taking off from the Trichy airport kept flying for about 4 hours with severe damage to its body. Now, how did this happen and what action has the airline taken in this matter? Anu Sharma is joining us with more details. Anu, a near tragedy there avoided as far as this incident is concerned. Take us through what transpired.
This was perhaps one of the most prolific near-miss in Indian aviation history. An Air India Express Airbus A320 flight number IX611 bound for Dubai from Trichy was on air for almost 4 hours even after it suffered extensive damage while taking off. What makes this incident bizarre is that pilots of this aircraft were unaware of the structural damage that the aircraft suffered. Let me take you through the sequence of events. The aircraft with registration ID VTAYD took off at 1:30 a.m. from Trichy Airport, and while taking off, its underbelly hits the perimeter wall. Pilots of the aircraft are unaware and continue flying. Meanwhile, Trichy Airport officials observe the damage on the perimeter wall just ahead of the runway. The air traffic control then contacts the aircraft and informs them about the matter. The pilots tell ATC that the aircraft is cruising at a cruising altitude over the Arabian Sea and all systems were performing normal. ATC doesn't take a chance and diverts the Air India Express aircraft to Mumbai. After 4 hours of taking off, the aircraft lands in Mumbai and taxis to its designated bay. It was only after landing that the damage to the aircraft was visible. The underbelly, parts of the wing and landing gear suffered extensive damage. A separate aircraft was then arranged for the 130 passengers of the Air India Express flight. However, the commander of the flight and the first officer have been derostered, and the Directorate General of Civil Aviation has initiated an investigation.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Anu. 130 passengers were on board, so a tragedy there. thankfully avoided. Let's move ahead now, but staying with the aviation space. The recent excise duty cut on aviation turbine fuel is not enough relief for airlines. That's the word coming in from Ajay Singh, chairman and MD of SpiceJet. According to him, rising oil prices and a weaker rupee has sent prices soaring. He adds that while any move by the government is welcome, airlines will also ask states to match the centre's cut in duty on ATF. Separately, the Civil Aviation Secretary R.N. Chaubey has reiterated that the government is working on further steps to help the aviation sector.
Has the recent cut on excise duty in ATF provided enough respite for airlines and aviation sector?
Well, certainly not. The costs have gone up significantly, about between 15 and 20% in the last few months because of the increase in oil price as well as the depreciation of the Indian rupee. But you know, whatever the government does is welcome. Even 3% is welcome. We will be going back to the state governments and asking them to match in their VAT the excise duty cut that has been made by the government of India. I think it's important both for airlines to do their part in ensuring sustainability. That will include inducting aircraft in new technology like this, which will help reduce cost, as well as raising their fares. So I think we need to do that as airlines, and of course we need to work with government to try and reduce cost, the likes of which no other airline, no other member of our peer group around the world actually has to face.
That package may not come all at one go, but incrementally. For example, the first one has come already by way of reduction in the excise duty. So we are still working on some other measures as well. It will keep coming. It will not be one.
What measures are we talking about in the other steps?
All those steps are essentially cost-cutting steps.
Okay.
All of them are cost-cutting steps. There may be one revenue enhancement step also, but we are working on it.
Well, from the aviation to the commodity space, we aspire to be the price determinant of gold in India. That's the word coming in from the MD and CEO of NSE, Vikram Lamai, who was speaking to CNBC TV18 after the exchange launched its commodity derivative segment. Now, the segment will see trading in gold and silver contracts. NSE has also applied to the market regulator, SEBI, for new products in the base metal and energy segment. Listen in.
Today we've launched gold and silver, and those are very large opportunities. As you know, in India the gold market is a very large market, and I think if it is developed in the right way, the kind of contracts and the volume that gets traded on exchanges can be a significant multiple of where we are today. Absolutely. Including the fact that over time we should aim to be the price determinant of gold in the country, given the dynamics surrounding gold in India.
Well, a relief for Bandhan Bank as SEBI paves the way for the bank to cut promoter shareholding to meet RBI's licensing norms for private sector banks. Now, Bandhan Bank gets a SEBI exemption for 1-year lock-on promoter equity share sale. Remember, SEBI's listing norms mandate a 1-year lock-in period for any promoter stake sale. The bank was listed in March of this year. Well, on to a CNBC TV18 exclusive from the banking space. Yes Bank promoters Rana Kapoor and Madhu Kapoor will meet soon to put an end to the acrimony between them. The meeting has been mediated by Rajat Monga, who is the senior vice president of the bank. Now, the promoter may agree to give a board seat to Shagun Kapoor, and an announcement to that effect is expected in the first week of December. Well, on to some court action now. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear Gujarat government's plea seeking approval for a high-powered committee's recommendations to provide relief to Adani Power, Tata Power as well as SR Power's plants in the state. Now, the Apex Court will hear the petition in 2 weeks' time. The committee looked into 3 mega power projects in the states and proposed opening up the power purchase agreements along with large haircuts for lenders to make these projects economically viable. Well, on to some national stories now. Amidst the raging Rafale controversy, Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has visited the Dassault facility in Paris. Sources say that during the visit, the minister took stock of progress in production of the Rafale jets, whose delivery will begin to India in the year 2019, September 2019 to be specific. Well, meanwhile, the government has stepped up the counter-attack on Rahul Gandhi. Union Minister Piyush Goyal today accused the Congress president of making false statements regarding the Rafale deal.
We have of late been experiencing the activities of a serial liar. I think only an issueless man can repeat a lie again and again because he doesn't have any other issues. But even if a lie is repeated 100 times, it will never become a substitute for the truth.
Well, allegations and counter-allegations, we're yet to hear the last of the Rafale controversy. Well, a mainstay of Kerala's agricultural output, the district of Wayanad has seen a number of its plantations hit by the recent floods. But as CNBC TV18's Jude Sanath discovered while working on this ground report, the losses are mounting by the day, but there's no final estimate on what the exact damage is. Take a look.
There's little left of this 25-acre plantation near Manandavadi in Wayanad. Its owner, Thomas, used to grow coffee primarily with coconut trees adding to the business. That was until the floods damaged his crops, destroyed equipment like motors, and washed away adjoining roads. Thomas says he's not hopeful of reaping anywhere near the 20 lakh rupee harvest he usually rings in every year.
I have lost half my produce of coconuts and coffee crop. I was also cultivating ginger and black pepper, both of which have also been washed away.
It's a story that was repeated at almost every plantation we visited in Wayanad. A significant portion of these losses is borne by Wayanad's banana plantations. For instance, in the worst of the deluge, floodwaters reached at least a couple of meters in height, and as you probably notice here, this has wilted away a large part of these plantations. For the state and district authorities, however, the bigger problem is that there is still no clarity on the extent of crop damage. A standing committee set up to investigate crop damage has pegged the loss to banana, tea and pepper plantations at 6.71 crore rupees. For coconut and areca nut plantations, this number is pegged at 3 crore rupees. This is for the municipality of Manandavadi alone. But the committee says a final number will come only when its assessments are complete, and that is months away.
Our initial estimate tells us that in the entire municipality, losses would be around 50 crore rupees, of which agricultural losses are estimated at 30 crore rupees. We are still conducting field visits to arrive at a precise number.
This explains why even 2 months after the flood waters started receding, the Kerala government is yet to submit a report of the damage in the state to the centre. This has resulted in further delays to the receipt of compensation for the centre, and that only means more hardship for the farmers and plantation owners, not to mention the rebuilding efforts. In Wayanad, Jude Sanath.
Well, the aftermath of the floods bringing more pain. Jude Sanath getting us that special report. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Business Hour. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good night.